Hello YouTube. It's time to talk about the false concept of multiculturalism. And I know there's some other videos out there on YouTube about this, but it's something that can't be said enough. And so I'm going to throw in my 2 cents, and maybe it will lead somebody to some of those other videos, or maybe it will be said in just the right way to help someone draw the right connection. And you know, one thing people tell me is that, hey man, just look at all of the cities in the United States and how diverse they are ethnically. And that's multiculturalism, man. You can't deny it. And so let's consider that for a moment from a line of logic. Let's consider that the fact is that the culture on the West Coast of the United States is a little different from the culture on the East Coast, which is a little different from the culture in the South, which is a little different from the culture in the North. And so the culture in LA is different from the culture in Boston, is different from the culture in Miami, is different from the culture in Chicago. And yet all of these places have one thing in common, and that is that they're American cities. They all have the common thread of American culture. They're all imbued with certain aspects of our culture, like the Postal Service or McDonald's, right? Even if the individuals there within that culture don't prefer McDonald's or don't use the Postal Service, they prefer a private courier or whatever, they still understand that these are fundamental aspects of our umbrella culture, of the American culture. And so what we have here in the United States is a hybrid culture that includes all of the best parts of all of the ethnicities that make up our extremely diverse demographics. So the idea that that this is multicultural is really totally false, because you don't have a bunch of different cultures isolated, stacked next to one another. What you have is a big overreaching culture that has some sort of ambiguity in terms of trying to define it. You can point out things, like I said, maybe McDonald's or movie theaters or muscle cars or whatever, some of these things that seem to be quintessential to the American culture. But they're really just data points in a big sort of smear that covers the whole idea of what makes American culture different from Canadian culture or different from the culture in Mexico. And so we're an extremely ethnically diverse place, and our culture is extremely complex, and it's not easily defined in a number of words, in a few number of words, because it draws from all of these different ethnic backgrounds. And as such, you'll see that there's a lot of subculture here in the United States, like the subculture of LA, and the subcultures that exist within the culture of LA, and the subculture of Miami, and the subcultures that exist within the subcultures of the Miami culture. But the common theme through all of these is that they're part of America, and everybody within these cultures, these subcultures, understands that it is a part of American culture. It's not part of Canadian culture. It's not part of European culture or Japanese culture, even though there's definitely going to be overlap with those cultures as well, because they too have ethnic diversity. So when people want to say that multiculturalism, the real response is that this is multi-ethnic, and we're all one culture despite the cultural differences. You can find cultural differences in your neighborhood just walking down your block and talking to all of the different people who live within a 1-mile radius of you. But you guys are all still part of the same culture. You're all still part of the American culture, or the culture of Chicago, or the culture of Lake County or Cook County. So I totally reject the concept of multiculturalism as a false concept, in my opinion, it's something it's driven, it's pushed by cultural Marxists who want to destroy the American culture and Western culture specifically because, well, I don't know, more reasons, right? I think because the intellect of people who subscribe to that kind of ideology is highly lacking. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the differences between multicultural, which doesn't exist, and multi-ethnic, which is what you find any place on Earth where you have ethnic diversity, where you have more than one ethnicity mingling together and living in harmony. Otherwise, what you have is disparate cultures that isolate and butt up against one another maybe, but there's culture clash. It's not homogeneous. They don't live necessarily in harmony. They live sort of isolated, where the boundary of two distinct cultures exists. There is a clear boundary. There are national boundaries or other types of borders that are very distinct in terms of the differences between those two separate cultures. So reject the idea, the false concept of multiculturalism, and embrace the multi-ethnic diversity that exists in a lot of places on this planet, because it's beautiful and it offers us a lot of wonderful variety in our lives. Thanks for listening.